So, Heather, it's so wonderful that you're able to join me today just to talk about what life is like while we're in this state of shutdown. Um, you have had an extraordinary career as a flute player. You're our principal flute player with the Pasadena Symphony, but you do many other things. And I have always been in awe of your ability to focus when you're at the end of a huge, long, demanding day, and I'm still asking you to play with excitement and vibrancy and interest when you're in a rehearsal with the Pasadena Symphony at
Mhm.
10:15 at night. How do you manage to sustain the kind of energy that you need to be able to do everything you do?
That's a great question. I'm not sure I always sustain my energy, but I do my best. And I think the the thing is, studio, as exciting sometimes as studio music can be, it can be such, how what the saying is, 90% boredom, 10%, terror. So
Mhm.
when we get, like, if I'm at the end of the day and I drive into Pasadena Symphony, it's a pleasure. It's music I want to play. It's so many, even just technical aspects of studio music now has no key signatures. I come in, I'm challenged again to play phrases longer than 4 bars, 8 bars, and the focus. It helps me. I always say my orchestral playing helps me so much with my studio playing, actually. So it's always a pleasure to come in and do those rehearsals and concerts.
Yeah, musically it's so different, isn't it? But the pressure is enormous. Of course, we don't have a lot of rehearsal time in Pasadena, but you have to lay things down. Has it got to be perfect the first time when you're in a studio, or is there a sort of leeway there?
It's a different kind of pressure. Yes, there is some leeway. I mean, you're always hoping to get it right the first time. Different composers have different techniques. So sometimes they let you rehearse and then you're going to record. Nowadays, a lot of times they're putting that red light, we call it the red light when we're recording. The red light goes on the very first time you're doing it. So it just adds that extra pressure. You don't really get a chance to kind of, play it through to see who you're playing with, what you're playing with. Sometimes, we have headphones on, not just for the clip track to keep us all together, but there's also electronic sounds and coming through there, or they're piping in the strings for us and things. So on your first take now, if they're recording it, there is that little extra pressure of, just trying to get your bearings of where you are. And playing your own part, as great as you can.
So
So
can you hear yourself clearly through the headphones?
we're not in the headphones, so, or hopefully not. It's actually, I don't like to have myself in the headphones.
Mhm.
So it is, you get used to playing with, I play with one uh,
Okay.
speaker on, or whatever it's called, headphone on my right ear. I like to do it on my right ear. Because I'm usually playing principal, so that leaves this ear open. So I have better access to my oboe player on the left side to try. So that's what I'm hearing the most. And then plus my right hearing, I think, has been from the piccolo playing, has been losing. It's not as good as it used to be.
Aha, yes, yes. The occupational hazard. So
Yeah.
you're listening with one ear to yourself, to your principal oboe, and then you're getting information through the other headphone. You're playing in a very dry environment. Um, and then when you come to play with the Pasadena Symphony, the hall has got a resonance that you have to play in and enjoy and hear across the orchestra in a very different sort of way. Do you play differently when you're in a studio compared to when you're playing with the symphony?
Yes, which uh, you don't realize it, how you adapt until it just sort of happens and you realize like, wow, this is a whole different situation. So when I'm in the symphony, I can play out, I can play vibrato, I can play without a headset. So I have like my just, you know, I can hear things differently and more. And it's great. And then in the studio, yeah, it's like, you know, having your arm tied behind your back in one sense. They like it. Sometimes I have to play so intensely soft. You know, you can barely hear it. There would be no way in an orchestral setting that I would be asked to do that. And so it's just being under the microscope, I should say, microscope a little more. But it's just, that's the other thing. It's just so enjoyable when you get to the symphony because you get to play and there's so much more sounds around you to play off of. You're playing off of people more, which is why we do this, right? It's a team sport in some ways. We want to with
It is a team sport, isn't it?
And so many times now, even in the studios, even if they have a whole orchestra there, they start what we call is striping, where they'll say, okay, now we're just going to do the strings. And then now we're going to do the woodwinds separate. And now we're going to do the brass separate. So you're not even playing in a orchestral setting anymore because they want that much control over, you know, the volumes and the balances that they're doing.
Does that mean that you're sitting around, you go off and have a cup of coffee and come back half an hour later, or are you just sitting there while they're recording something?
No, you're sitting there while they're recording something and you're sweating it out that you got to go play by yourself and go play a song. And everybody's sitting there listening to you.
Oh, wow.
But it's more just, that's where the intonation gets really tricky because you don't have that room, that sound in the room to help, you know, especially for woodwind players. I mean, intonation is where we're at all the time trying to play in tune. And so it just makes that that aspect of playing that much more difficult.
That's one of the things that I've enjoyed so much about the woodwinds in the Pasadena Symphony is that you're so keyed into each other and so quick to adjust and fix intonation. You have to do that all the time when you're in the studio.
Yeah, and it's kind of a freelance mentality. I mean, I know I have orchestral jobs, but I always think of myself as a freelancer. Mm-hmm. So part of freelancing is, you know, getting along with your colleagues and never coming in there like, okay, I'm right and you have to adjust around me. And there has to be that team spirit to like, we got to make this work. And you're right, at Pasadena Symphony, I could not ask for a better woodwind section. I mean, I'm in heaven whenever we're all there. It's such a treat.
And most people know that quite a few players rotate through the symphony in the woodwinds as well. And my experience has been with, it doesn't matter who is there, we have the same kind of focus, the same kind of energy and desire for it to be as perfect as we can make it.
Yeah, well, for sure. And we're having a good time doing it. You know, there's that feeling of you want to be part of that woodwind section. You're part of the bigger picture of the orchestra. And plus we're, you know, we want to please you. You know, you are asking for us to do this and that, and, you know, and there's that camaraderie, you know, like when you're saying, hey, you know, make it this way. I always said, I love your adjectives. The way you describe music to us, it's like, it's not just saying, you know, play louder, play softer, play, you know, it's you describe it and you're allowing us to interpret that to how I play the flute and how the section's going to sound together and create that sound. And I love that.
Well, I'm glad to hear you think that's what I do. My feeling is I'm just saying higher, lower, louder, softer, faster, and I try to be more descriptive because when you're working with excellent musicians, that's much more interesting for you. So if I'm doing that, that's fantastic. So I was talking to Amy and Andrew the other day, our concertmaster and principal violist, and Amy was talking about the difference between a European orchestra where they play in a more chamber music-like way, where they're watching each other more than they're requiring great precision from the conductor. Um, but when you're playing in the Pasadena Symphony or other orchestras, how much are you watching the players in front of you? Because quite often, if you're not in a sweet spot in the middle of the stage where you sit, you're not really hearing the front of the orchestra very clearly, are you?
No, and that's why we get a lot of comments, right? That the woodwinds were behind, we're behind the strings. So we do kind of, it's funny what we all listen. Sometimes it depends what I'm playing. I generally, my first instinct is to listen to my core principal winds. Because that's really where I try and lock in. Many times I have to play with the strings. So in that sense, most of the time it's matching them, matching their pitch, matching like the phrasing they're doing, but holding together. I'm actually looking at, people ask, do you look at the conductor? And it's like, actually, yes, I do. Because you're kind of, holding it together. And if I can't hear very well, even though I am in the middle, I have kind of a nice place to sit in the orchestra. But if I can't hear really well, I'm like dependent on you to keep me in the right spot. And usually you'll see when I'm really like out of it, because my eyes go like, help me, David, where am I? I don't get lost too often, but once in a while I'll just, and boom, you give me that, here you go. Here's your entrance. That's always a scary thing.
So what do you miss at this time as you're sitting around at home, twiddling your thumbs and knitting and cooking?
I am needle pointing, actually.
Oh, good. Oh, I'm impressed.
I am needle pointing. It's funny. I have the freelance life. I've been doing it for 30 plus years, and you don't realize what a hustle it is and what a stress it is until this happened. And we always knew, it was stressful, and the driving. So there was so much gained actually for a long time. Like I kept saying to my fiance, it's like, I'm just waiting to get bored. I'm waiting, and I literally put the flute in the case and didn't touch it for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
That was March 11th. And then I had to teach. So I had college students. So I started doing that. And I was like, oh, okay, I enjoy this. And then realizing I still don't miss that drive. I don't. And the flute has actually, I'm just starting to miss playing. And it took 6. So I was like, this is like a gift to just sort of rejuvenate. And, and of course I miss my colleagues, seeing, but they're, Zooming and texting and staying in touch. And it was funny because when you sent me the Villalobos recording that we did, video, that sort of, I was like, oh yeah, that kind of got me interested in playing again too. Not that, I know I'm going to play again, but it was just like a nice break. But as far as like non-musical things, I do miss sports. Like I miss March Madness. I'm a big sports person. So I was bummed when March Madness went away, and we
Yeah.
usually go to baseball stadiums like every summer. That's our summer trip. And
Oh, great.
yeah, but I'm kind of mad at MLB for letting the Astros cheat and not doing. So I'm okay actually taking
Uh,
a season off of baseball. But yeah, so now, I was like, oh, I'm looking at my flute. That's why it's like it is calling to me now, and I just want to play repertoire. Like take this opportunity to. I spend so much time working on, technique and sound and attacks, like getting down to the minutia for the studios, that I just want to play, like, and go back to, because the flute rep, actually, we have some really nice chamber music, flute and chamber
yes.
music.
Oh, absolutely. And, I completely resonate with what you're saying about taking time. I played as assistant principal cellist with the Denver Symphony when it was still the Denver Symphony. It's the Colorado Symphony now, but I played there for 3 or 4 years. And then I quit to be the assistant conductor of the orchestra. So when I stopped playing in the orchestra, I stopped playing for about a year.
Mm.
I don't think I played at all. And I didn't miss it until I felt like I really had to. My fingers started to get itchy, and I needed that tactile stimulation and sort of continuity. It's like a feeling continuity. And when I came back to it, I loved it more. And in a strange way, I think I was better when I came back.
Mm-hmm.
There are things that I've done since then mentally, which I understand, um, help you uh, help you to prepare physically. I didn't realize that subconsciously I was working on all sorts of things while I wasn't playing. And when I came back, they were solidified. So I've done a lot of work since then on memorization and sort of dreaming through music and understanding that in that process, I'm learning and discovering all the time. So I bet when you come back, you're going to be hotter than ever. Back to music. You mentioned chamber music, and I've actually got this thing queued up to play from a recital that you shared with me a year ago at Boston Court. And um, I asked you, what would you like to play? And you said this Villa-Lobos duo, the jet whistle.
Mm-hmm.
And what I think is really interesting about this piece is that it's actually 2 pages that are just repeated with no variation. It's exactly the same the second time through, and you don't really think of that so much. But what I think is interesting about that, I start with the melody and you're accompanying with this little sort of cheeky 2, 3, 2, 3,
Mm-hmm.
2, 3. And then once I'm finished playing the melody, you play the melody. Then we do some fun scales, and then we just repeat the whole thing again. And it's got this wonderful kind of dramatic, soulful quality to it. I think it's like a very sensuous dance, and I think it's a really lovely combination of the sounds of the sort of middle register of the cello, the accompaniment that the flute plays. I find the lower part of the flute really very sensuous, and then you have this soaring melody on top when I accompany you. And it's very simple, but it's really effective music, I think.
I
So
think it is too. It's almost like a tango, and it is like a dance. And I remember now, you jogged my memory that he did like the just, having the low sounds with the high sounds. He also liked having wood cello with the metal with the flute, and so not just this combo, but he liked using those combos a lot.
yes,
But you're right, and it's just it's not a, it's actually harder than it sounds, the piece, but there's a simplicity to it, just of a accompaniment and a beautiful
yeah,
lyrical, passionate melody going over the top, very like Spanish and, kind of
Yeah, it's very beautiful.
typical. Yeah.
Well, let's listen to that now. So that was Heather and me playing this wonderful piece, the Jet Whistle, the first movement of a three-movement piece by Villa-Lobos. And I'm so happy you're able to play on that recital with me, Heather. And I'll look forward to doing some other chamber music with you in the future. What kind of music would you want to play? What's your favorite flute chamber music?
Oh, I mean, it's so common, and the Mozart flute quartet is just so beautiful. I'll never get tired of playing that.
Yeah.
The second movement and the slow movement. The Debussy trio is so challenging. Like every time, I remember when I was, the first time I played it was probably 30 years ago and I was like, this isn't so hard. And then as I get older, I'm like, wow, this is really hard to put together, because you realize you've gotten better. So your ears have gotten better, and you realized, oh, I wasn't playing it very well 30 years ago. But that, I'll never get tired of playing that.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not a lot of good woodwind quintets. But you know who I really like also is Alec Wilder, who's he wrote a lot of wild stuff in the 50s for woodwinds. And I've done quite a few house concerts, actually, because probably only your neighbors would come to listen to this. And, so I was exploring his music, because the combos are, it could be a woodwind quintet plus a bari saxophone.
Oh, wow.
He did things with singers and winds, tuba solos that are beautiful, things like that. So as far for wind players, that's been a fun discovery for me.
Well,
Yeah.
Heather, thanks so much for your time, and thanks so much for your amazing artistry. I just love your playing and what you bring personally to every note that you play. So thank you, and I can't wait to make music again with you.